I know. While everyone's taking their seat, I'll tell a little story about why tonight's topics are so important to me. I'm Harula Kiriakou, born and raised in Los Angeles, California. I spent my entire childhood in a home that was located in the San Fernando Mountains. I was evacuated multiple times as a child during our wildfire seasons. So having this topic be something that applies outside of Southern California is really interesting and really cool for me to see and hear what our panelists have to say tonight. All right. So like I said, Harula Kiriakou. I'm the co-chair of our Delta Emerging Leaders Associate Board and the co-chair of tonight's event, Green Soapbox. And I'm very excited for you all to be here. I will hand it off to my co-chair, Grace, to introduce herself.
Hi. Yeah, we're so glad you're out here on this beautiful evening. My name is Grace Snyder, and I'm a co-chair of the DELS. I've been able to be with the group for almost 2 years, and I'm short. So thank you so much for joining us. We are members of the Delta Emerging Leaders, which we will talk more about that later tonight. And I'm really happy to see this turnout for everyone joining us online and in person for tonight's panel discussing wildfires and Midwestern air quality. Before we get started, of course, we have a few housekeeping items, which I will read for us. For our in-person guests, please help yourselves to the tasty food available over to your right through the evening. Beer and wine will be available until 6. If you need the washroom at any time, it is through the lobby out there with the elevators and then turn right. We will have an opportunity in the final hour of the evening for guests to participate in a Q&A with the panel, so please don't be shy. Speak up if you're online. Please feel free to add your questions in the chat at any time during the evening on Zoom. Just know that we will answer them at the end. Also, online guests can toggle on automated closed captions provided by Zoom if helpful. I find them helpful. And if you have any other questions about Delta Institute, the DELS, or are in need of technical support, please feel free to ask any of the DELS like us for help. If you're online, shoot a message. We have DELS on there waiting for your questions. Tonight's program wouldn't be possible without the help and support from our host, William Blair. Thank you so much for having us here. Definitely. I'd like to take a moment to introduce David Fording. He is a partner and portfolio manager at William Blair, where he is running both the U.S. growth and U.S. sustainability ESG strategies. He's a founding member of William Blair Investment Management's ESG leadership team. And he's also volunteering as a member of the Delta Institute's governing board of directors. Please welcome David. Thank you so much.
Thanks to all of you for joining us this evening. I'm very excited to have such a great turnout, as was just mentioned. So William Blair, as some of you will know if you're William Blair employees, is an independent employee-owned firm founded here in Chicago in 1935. So we're coming up on our 90th anniversary. Today, we operate more than 20 offices around the globe, but really our roots are here in Chicago. And much of what we do is focused on impacting communities wherever we operate, but clearly with the vast majority of our employees here in the Chicago-based area. We look to have a big impact on the Midwest broadly and Chicago specifically. Our expertise as a firm is in investment banking, institutional money management, and private wealth management. And we have a longstanding tradition of community engagement at William Blair. What's unique, I think, about our approach is that it is completely employee-led. So any organization that you'll find William Blair supporting has someone, a partner, an employee, doesn't matter, who's personally involved in that organization. So that link is very important to us. And that's true in my case as well. Several years ago, when I wanted to find a nonprofit to get involved in, I was looking for one that had a history of impact, one that had was environmentally focused, and one that I could really learn about a whole variety of environmental issues that are impacting local communities. And I came upon Delta Institute and immediately reached out and was fortunate enough to be able to join the board there. And I'm just great to see the impact that Delta Institute is having. Across all aspects of William Blair, and I know I can say this on behalf of my colleagues who are involved in the community engagement activities here. What we try to basically inspire best practices across philanthropy, employee engagement, governance, and environmental stewardship in a way that is reflective of our values and our commitment to the local communities we serve. So we continue to be impressed by the work of Delta Institute in partnering with communities throughout the Midwest in tackling some of the biggest environmental challenges the region faces. And as many of you may know, some of you may not know, it's the 25th anniversary of Delta Institute. So it's 25 years of great impact. And I join you in applauding Bill and the team for doing such a great job with that. Anyway, I'm looking forward to the discussion tonight. Thank you to all the panelists and the moderator for joining us, and to the Dells and Patrick and everyone in Delta for organizing this. And so without further ado, enjoy this evening's conversation, and thank you again for being with us. Back to you.
Thank you, David. Now we'd like to take a moment to introduce you to Delta CEO, Bill Schleiser, who will share more about Delta's work. Bill oversees Delta's programmatic strategy, operations, engagement, and fundraising efforts at as Delta CEO. From 2011 to 2015, he served as managing director, guiding project implementation across several areas, including those related to the environmental markets, climate, agriculture, water, and ecosystems. And he has been on staff at Delta since 2004, which is 20 years. He serves on the Cook County Commission for Social Innovation, and in 2019, Crane Chicago Business named Bill as a notable LGBTQ executive, and then in 2022, also named him a notable leader in sustainability. Please help me introduce Bill.
Hey, good evening, everybody. It is so exciting to be here. I literally just got off a plane from Denver to be at this event tonight because I'm super excited for us to have the Green Soapbox live again. So we used to do this. Actually, the Green Soapbox is the oldest event that the Delta Emerging Leaders has put on. And you may have seen our other events like Boost, where we just had a 10th anniversary. But Green Soapbox really started so that we could get up on our soapboxes and talk about those super important conversations and issues that are hitting us every single day. And what we're talking about tonight is nothing like we've seen before, right? Especially in the city, in the Midwest, how it's impacting communities. And it's just getting weirder and weirder everywhere where we're at. So I'm really excited about us having this event hybrid and not in a tiny bar where it used to be held. So we've evolved the event even, and I'm super excited about that. Again, thank you to William Blair for hosting and sponsoring this event, along with our other sponsors, RW Ventures and Spalding Ridge. Without their support, we wouldn't have this great space tonight to have this great conversation. So really excited about that. So as you've heard, Delta's been around for 25 years, and we are a Chicago-based, Midwest-focused nonprofit, really looking at the intersection of improving sustainability, creating economic opportunity, and centering that in community. And we do that through 3 program areas. Our nature-based climate solutions is focused about reintegrating nature into community, specifically those communities that are hardest hit by those impacts of climate change that we're going to be talking about today. We have some great programs under that. We're working on several neighborhoods in the South Side to implement green infrastructure on vacant lots with partners Blacks in Green and Emerald South. And we also have started a tree planting consortium in Northwest Indiana, where we'll be planting over 2,000 trees over the next year to really replace the canopy that's been lost so that we can mitigate those impacts of climate change that are happening. Our other main program area is resilient agriculture, where we're trying to change the landscape of the Midwest so that we can keep the soil that we have, rebuild it, and really have productive systems that actually help a farmer's bottom line. And we have some really innovative work happening in this portfolio as well, which I'm really excited about. We are looking at how do you bring that value of the soil into the land appraisal process so that farmers actually get equity by implementing conservation practices. And we're launching a pilot here in Illinois over the summer, so stay tuned. It's really, really exciting. Finally, we do sustainability and support services, which is all about helping communities with their needs. We have a lot of history in brownfields redevelopment, waste reduction, and a whole variety of other urban planning, climate planning work. Right now, we're working with the city of South Bend to redo their climate action plan. If you want more about that, you can talk to Natalie, who's on staff, who's working on that one. Look out for the Delta staff that are here today. They're great folks, really knowledgeable, technical experts, love talking about the work, working with everybody. And that's really what our sustainability and support services is. You might recall the waste strategy that Chicago passed in 2021. Delta authored that. And now we're seeing the results of that happen as we actually created a plan that was implementable and action-oriented. And we made them promise that they would do stuff from it before we even started. So that's the sort of stuff that we get to now celebrate and reflect on it now that we get to celebrate our 25th anniversary. So this event is our second of 3 events to celebrate 25 years. And mark your calendars for May 21st because we're gonna have a really big party. Tickets just went on sale this week, so there's more information on the website. But one thing we know how to do at Delta is celebrate because the work is hard, so we got to party hard too. So really excited about that. Stay tuned for more details. But with that, I do want to turn it back over so we can get to the panel tonight. So thank you, everybody.
As Bill mentioned, the Delta Emerging Leaders have been working on this event that you are at right now. And we're also looking for new members if you're interested in volunteering on our associate board to help plan fun events like these and Boost, which happens in the fall. We just opened our application today. Delta Emerging Leaders serves 1-year renewable terms on the associate board of Delta Institute. This year's application closes on May 6th for terms beginning July 1. And if you want to learn more about joining our board, you can talk to one of us tonight online or come to our recruitment session on March 26th next week. If you go to the website for Delta Institute, you will see that. And I walked into a bar and got this, by the way. I met some wonderful Dell's associate board members at their time. They're now on the board. I was entering the University of Chicago for public policy and wanted to focus on the environment. And this just happened to be a great fit. So I applied and I'm really glad I'm here. Let's hand it over. I wanted to say one more thing. Oh my goodness. We have a silent auction going on right now. This is another way to support the Delta Institute and events like this. So it's online and there are some great goodies. Be sure to check your email reminders. There's a link to the silent auction there. It closes online tomorrow, so the winner doesn't need to be present. And all proceeds support the work being done at the Delta Institute. Thank you.
Couple more announcements. I also believe the wooden placards on the tables have QR codes for the silent auction items. So as you guys are milling around later tonight, you can look at them there. And as Grace said, a silent auction will not close until tomorrow, Friday evening. So anything you see, keep it open. Need to rebid. We'd love to see some wars online. But now, what you all been waiting for, it's my honor to introduce you all to this evening's moderator, Mackenzie Siren. She was born and raised around the Great Lakes, and Mackenzie has proudly called Chicago home since 2013. Dedicated to shaping a more connected, equitable, and climate resilient future, Mackenzie currently serves as the head of product at Cloverly, a digital platform empowering businesses to scale their climate action. She is also the co-founder of the Chicago Climate Connect, which actually I have gone to your events. We should talk. Chicago's largest recurring climate event and a place for climate-minded Chicagoans to meet, inspire, and support each other. Please help me welcome Mackenzie and our fellow moderators, speakers.
Just checking, does this work? Can you hear me okay? Awesome. Thank you so much. I always love, I'm just gonna hold this, I think, because it's more natural for me. Patrick, before I get started, I have a favor to ask you. I did not bring my phone up and I cannot see a clock. So can you wave your arms around frantically as we get to like 6:20? Thank you so much. I probably won't look at it. You can also, if I'm not seeing Patrick waving his arms around, feel free to also start waving your arms around. Okay. And I say that because I am very excited about tonight's panel. So I could potentially get lost in conversation. It's happened before. So thank you to Delta Institute for having me here tonight. I'm super excited. I had the opportunity to chat with our panelists, not only as a group, but also one-on-one. So I got a sneak peek for what we're in store for tonight, and we should all be excited. So I'm going to intro all of our panelists, then we'll dive into the discussion. All right. So on the far end, we've got Olga Batista. Pronouns are she, her. Olga is the executive director of the Southeast Environmental Task Force, a longstanding community organization dedicated to mitigating pollution, holding polluters accountable, and protecting the residents and green spaces in the Calumet region. Before joining, Olga worked with the Alliance for the Great Lakes as the community planning manager for the southeast side of Chicago, and was one of the lead organizers for both the Southeast Side Coalition to ban pet coke and the campaign to stop General Iron. We have a last minute addendum, which we didn't want to leave off, which is very exciting. So lastly, the Southeast Environmental Task Force recently settled their second civil rights complaint in less than a year. So congratulations. This time with US EPA, prompted by the proposed relocation of General Iron from Lincoln Park to the southeast side. So congrats, welcome, Olga. Great. And then in the middle, we've got Krista Thomason, she, her pronouns. Krista is a physical scientist with the Air and Radiation Division's air monitoring team at the US Environmental Protection Agency Region 5 office, which serves, it's a long list, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Minnesota, Ohio, Wisconsin, and 35 tribes. In her role, she provides technical support to the region's air monitoring programs, evaluates exceptional event demonstrations, and tracks wildfire smoke, local meteorology, and ozone concentrations. Prior to the EPA Region 5, she worked at EPA Region 8 office in Denver, Colorado, and for the Ohio EPA. Krista has a bachelor's degree in meteorology and a master's degree in environmental studies from Ohio University. Welcome, Krista. All right. And finally, Kyra Woods, she, her pronouns. Kyra works with the city of Chicago as a program manager in the newly reinstated Department of Environment. Woohoo! In her role, she supports environmental and climate policy development, including leading the development of the city's 2022 Action Climate Plan. Additionally, she supports other departments in managing climate equity projects, such as the 2023 Community Heat Mapping Campaign with the Chicago Department of Public Health, which we'll touch on later. She believes that Chicago's bold climate commitments can lead to significant economic, health, and environmental benefits for residents if steeped in the values of racial equity, justice, and community leadership. Prior to joining the city of Chicago, Kyra worked with Sierra Club, the Illinois chapter, Kyra worked with the Sierra Club Illinois chapter as, yes, the Ready for 100 Chicago campaign coordinator, and served as a U.S. Peace Corps volunteer. Awesome. Welcome, Kyra. All right. I'm going to try clicking this up. So, all right.
You can still.
Can you hear? Okay. So to set a little bit of context for tonight, as probably many of us are very well aware, summer in Chicago usually brings beautiful days steeped in sunshine, where we can spend our time in parks or on beaches on our Great Lakes or on patios with friends and family. This was less the case in the summer of 2023, when much of Chicago and the Midwest was blanketed by wildfire smoke. So before we dive into the discussion, Krista has been kind enough to actually bring some materials from the EPA that they've developed to walk us through sort of this phenomenal event that we saw last year. So Krista, as you go through them, if you can point out specifically the uniqueness of this event and just at a high level touch on the impacts it actually had to air quality.
Of course.
Yeah.
Thank you for the intro.
Thank you.
With that, we'll start the slides. Can you hear me okay?
Mhm.
Perfect. All right. Hello, everybody. Krista here from US EPA Region 5. Thanks for having me today. Really excited to be a part of this panel an important discussion, especially with the wildfire smoke episodes that we saw last year. To say the least, 2023 was unprecedented for wildfire smoke in the eastern portions of the US. I really like to start with these two photos. Believe it or not, they're both the same viewpoint of the Chicago skyline, even though it doesn't look like it. But the photo on the left is a view on a clear, good air quality day of the Chicago skyline. The photo on the right is the exact same viewpoint, but from June 27th of 2023. And you can really see how dense this wildfire plume that came down from Canada was. You can't see basically anything in front of you. This was really historic. We had never seen anything like this in our region. Western portions of the United States do deal with this more frequently, but for us, it's a pretty rare phenomenon. So why was 2023 so unusual? So these are two different maps of active fires in Canada. This does not include active fires in the United States, but the first map on the left is from July 17 of 2022. And then the map on the right is exactly 1 year later on July 17th of 2023. And when you compare these two maps, you can see just how many more fires there are in 2023 alone versus 2022 at this moment in time. But you can really see how many more there are in eastern portions of Canada. So this was a record-breaking year for wildfires in Canada. It was the most land that was ever burned, roughly 45 million acres. That equates to the size of the entire state of North Dakota, and it's about 5% of the forested land in Canada. And we know Canada has a lot of forests, so for 5% of that to burn is a lot. So with the really prominent plume that we saw the end of June, essentially what happened is we had a weather system that was tracking across the Great Lakes. Around this weather system, we had counterclockwise wind flow, and it was just pushing from the eastern portions of Quebec and Ontario, the smoke right into our area. And unfortunately, with climate change, there is the carbon cycle. So we know climate change drives wildfires because of the dry vegetation, the hotter temperatures. Then also, when you burn when the wildfires are burning, it's putting carbon into the atmosphere as well, which also drives climate change. So unfortunately, it's this feedback loop. So I just wanted to give a little insight into why 2023 was really unusual. So if you look in this Quebec and Ontario area around Hudson Bay, that's where our next animation will be. So I will play this and then describe it. So what you see there are actually wildfire smoke plumes, believe it or not. The very bright white areas that you saw at the beginning of this video are actually clouds associated with that weather system that pushed the smoke into our area. But where you see the really rapid development of the smoke plumes, that's exactly what you're seeing. That's a 10-hour period on June 28th of 2023. So this is visible satellite imagery that's actually taken with the GOES satellites. So just in a 10-hour period, we saw explosive development of these smoke plumes. And just imagine that happening all throughout Canada. Again, another animation because I really like these. So this is going to be the Midwestern region. I put a star where Chicago is. Again, the really bright white areas are clouds, but you can see the kind of grayish plume coming down from the northeast that's over our area. And I will play that one again. So really dense plume, never seen anything like this in the Midwest. We do have wildfire smoke plumes, but this was definitely the densest that we have seen. So now I kind of want to talk about, the health impacts and what we actually measured at the surface during this event. So how we measure air quality and what we're breathing is the AQI, called the Air Quality Index. So there are 6 different levels for the AQI. Essentially anything below the 100 level, which includes the yellow and green, is thought of as satisfactory air quality. Anything 100 and greater is what we consider to start being unhealthy. So that's the orange, the red, the purple, and the maroon. And so we do cover this for our various pollutants in the atmosphere. And now I'm going to, I should also explain how we measure this. So we have our state, local, tribal agencies that operate regulatory air quality monitors. They are required to do this under the Clean Air Act. So basically, they have to operate these monitors to make sure that we're not exceeding health standards. We have the National Ambient Air Quality Standards for different pollutants, but these monitors are collecting information in real time. So as soon as these monitors collected by our air agencies That data is automatically sent to airnow.gov, which is EPA's website. And you can go to airnow.gov. There's even an app on your phone to get your real-time air quality. So we have a picture of what's going on in real time with the air quality. So what did we actually see during this event, the end of June? So this is going to go day by day, the actual AQI levels that we saw for each day, starting on June 25th through July 4th. So I will let this play. So you can see an uptick in the maroon colors, which are pretty rare for us to see in this area. It kind of clears out the beginning of July, but then interestingly enough, you'll see an uptick around July 4th, and that's associated with fireworks. So I will go ahead and play this again. So good air quality, you see it start to ramp up across the state, and to see air quality this bad in such a large area is really historic for our area. And then a little uptick for fireworks. So this is my last slide to kind of put it all together. This is on our AirNow website as well. It's called the AirNow Fire and Smoke Map. So essentially this will plot all of our air monitors and sensors. So there's also regulatory monitors. We have some purple air sensors, if you're familiar with sensors for air quality, on this map at an instantaneous time. This is a screenshot from June 29th of 2023 during this large smoke plume. And I put a little star where Chicago is, but it's also overlaid with the gray areas. Those are estimated plumes where the satellites have detected the plumes. So you have the actual measurements, which are the circles and the squares, as well as the graphed plumes. And you can see we're in the very unhealthy AQI levels throughout the entire Midwest. Again, extremely historic and something that we had not seen before. And that's my last slide.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Well, awesome, but not awesome. I mean, the reason I was so excited about sharing that is when Krista showed that to me the first time I did that first slide, I thought you were missing an image. I was like, oh, you got to refresh or something. I'm missing something. And the fact that that was actually the image was flabbergasting. So thank you so much for sharing. That was super, super great. I also think you touched on a couple things that were around sort of the first topic, right? Which was essentially, you know, these feel new to us. How new are these? You know, is something like the summer of 2023. And I think from your overview, you know, it seems like these are quite new, in fact.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, we know Western portions of the United States have had to deal with this on a more frequent basis, but I mean, we had several events that impacted the Eastern coast even before then in earlier June, where we got just a little bit of it here in the Midwest, but then we had this event the end of June, and 2023, it was just smoke plume after smoke plume. Yeah, definitely historic and something that a new phenomenon for us to deal with.
So are there trends also to suggest that this is a new normal for us?
It's hard to say what will happen because 2023 was such an anomaly, but you know, with climate change and you know the burning seasons becoming longer and the vegetation becoming more dry, even though we are forecasted to have more precipitation in the Midwest due to climate change, it also, the West is forecast to be drier. Even if you have more moisture, heat puts more demand on plants, so it can dry it out more. The plant would need more moisture. So all these together with climate change, and then, you know, we're putting more carbon back into the atmosphere. It's hard to say what's going to happen, but I know we just had our warmest global winter on record. I just thought it was the contiguous United States, but we just had our warmest winter on record. So it's hard to say what will happen in 2024, but I know I saw an article, some Canadian officials are concerned that 2024 could be a worse wildfire year for them. So, which would in turn mean more smoke for us.
Yeah, I mean, this hits particularly home for me because I live here in Chicago in the Midwest, but I'm Canadian. So I'm from Southwestern Ontario originally, where wildfires were never a problem. It was our families sort of in British Columbia that we would have to look out for. We were getting evacuated from Fort Murray and things like that. But now with Quebec and getting into Ontario as well, it's become very much a reality for the entirety of Canada. Yeah. So I'm interested. So Kyra, question for you. So I know you partner closely with the Department of Health, of Public Health, actually. Can you put into perspective the negative health impacts that wildfire smoke causes?
Oh, sure. So I think in addition to actually seeing the plumes, right, and that intense fog, we have to think about what's actually causing that, and the ability to actually breathe in some of that particulate matter is directly impactful to our health. We know that there are quite a few respiratory health concerns that happen because of that type of pollution. And we also were very acutely aware that going inside or staying inside is not always feasible for everybody, whether perhaps your work keeps you outside, perhaps you don't have sufficient indoor air filtration as well. That would just make being inside or staying inside more difficult than, you know, maybe just a general PSA may lead you to think. And so those are the types of things that we're beginning to grapple with in terms of some of the like public health impacts and what to actually advise the general public for, but also how do we support and critically attend to the needs of our more vulnerable communities. Wildfires are a natural hazard or a hazard that we're seeing in the natural environment, right? I think the frequency is not natural based on some patterns, right? But in the space of emergency management, perhaps, or definitely with that nexus of public health, it is within the natural hazard space. It is a challenge to think about the various other, it's not a challenge, it is the challenge that we are taking on.
Yeah.
What other sources of pollution cause us to be concerned about air quality as well? And so last year's anomalies around the actual temperature and then the wildfire smoke are really critical, but they are also compounding other existing and known challenges around air quality as well that may have more acute impacts, not even may, they do have more acute impacts on certain geographies in the city. And then of course, certain populations who just on a person to person level may have different sensitivities as it relates to public health. So those are two dimensions of the work, both the greater public service and public safety announcements that you may see, or encouraging people to go to Air Now and have the app, but also recognizing that there are nuances even within a single household to personal levels of sensitivity that are critical. And then I think maybe to take it and flip it in another dimension, you have the global context around our climate conversation and very hyper-local disparities within the city proper. And of course, you see those disparities also when you consider the greater region.
Yeah, so talking about hyperlocal and that approach, what other pollutants, you mentioned there are other things besides wildfire and smoke that are contributing to air quality issues and the health concerns you're talking about. What other pollutants is the city monitoring for?
Sure. So I'm not going to get up beyond my skis, or however that phrase goes. So
Over your skis?
Over your
skis?
skis. Not a skier here, admittedly. Hiking maybe, but skiing. I went snowshoeing for the first time, in case anybody likes that. It was a good time. Better pace. But in terms of our, so we've actually, I think in one of your slides, you mentioned ozone. We've talked about particulate matter, VOCs, our NOx, our SOx, our acronyms or buzzwords you may have heard before. Recently, actually, I was on a webinar and one of the presenters was explaining how important solvents, like anything that you can kind of like smell, how impactful those are to our air pollution monitoring, and how we have to be mindful of that whole category as it relates to industry. The issue about particulate matter is varied, right? I think you may have been a biker behind a really dirty truck or a bus. That is definitely, as we think about vehicle emissions, maybe you have seen a train go through your neighborhood, or you've been stopped by a freight train perhaps. And if you live in a neighborhood where those happen a lot, I grew up on the Southwest side, and it was always this gamble, like getting to school on time and not getting stuck by the freight. Not only because it made me late for school, but I also like hated the stinky smell and being stuck in the car. And so even thinking about those types of elements of the industrial landscape, and then of course, that's only the transportation element. As we think about our industrial history of Chicago, that has evolved, and there, while technology is improving, we do have to be very mindful of the impacts that our industrial processes have on our hyperlocal communities as well as the greater area, because just like the wildfire issues and the smoke from the wildfire, the pollutants from a factory don't stay, right? And we have to be mindful of how they move and who they impact as well.
Yeah, no, I think talking about air quality as a whole and then back to wildfire smoke a little bit, I'm curious, I guess for you, Krista, what we talked, I think those of us that were here experienced what a smoky day in Chicago means. But I'm curious, can you expand a little bit on maybe what if this becomes new normal, what are the prolonged effects of this exposure over and over again?
Yeah, so we know the effect of particulate matter. We call it PM, especially the issue with PM 2.5. So 2.5 means it's 2.5 microns in diameter. It's a very fine particle that can lodge really deep into your lungs and cause issues. And with this wildfire plume that we saw the end of June, we saw very high levels of particulate matter into the very unhealthy ranges, where it's unhealthy for everybody, not just for those with asthma or sensitive groups, because that's a level of the AQI as well. But we know that, it's an increased risk of heart attacks, strokes, asthma. It's even associated with wheezing, coughing, and increased risk of death. So that's why we really encourage, during these events to download the AirNow app, stay up to date on airnow.gov. You can sign up on EnviroFlash, which is also through EPA's website. I think it's enviroflash.info. You can sign up for actual notifications if your air quality becomes a certain level, either forecasted or actually does, because we have state, local, tribal agencies that not only collect this data for us to get our real-time air quality, they also, a lot of areas do forecasting. So you can really stay up to date, because we know this is a really serious issue and what to do to protect yourself, which we also on the resource paper that is being sent around after, there's some resources about how to protect yourself during these events. If you have to be outside, make sure you're wearing an N95 mask. Try not to overexert yourself. Breathe more. Try to make a clean room, a cool room in your house you can make homemade filters as well. We have some instructions on our EPA website for that as well too, because we do know how dangerous it is.
Yeah, and so we'll be sharing an email after this for everyone who registered, right? Okay, cool. And so some of these materials will be included in that email, so folks will have access to them. So Olga, I'm curious. So this Southeast Environmental Task Force, you work directly in pollution mitigation and understanding health outcomes for the communities in the Calumet region specifically. And I had to Google, just so I got it right, what the Calumet region was. So I'm going to share this just in case someone's learning along with me. So the Calumet region is basically encompasses the southern tip of Lake Michigan. It's a little bit of Illinois, sort of like South Chicago, the coastal region of, I'm looking at you to like set me straight the moment I go off. Okay. The coastal region of Indiana, and then just like a little wee bit of Michigan. Is that correct? Okay. Awesome. All right. I got it right. So specific to that region then, which it incorporates some of Chicago, can you touch on the economic impacts of these air quality events, specifically on the communities and the public health systems that you've been charged with advocating for?
And I could talk about some, is this thing working? Okay.
Maybe not.
No.
Turn on the switch.
See, better.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to talk to Bill later, because I think we need to do this research, to like answer your question properly. It's something that we've been talking about a little bit. But I could tell you some, just like anecdotal, just
Yeah.
what I know from being on the ground. Like we have, I have a family member whose son misses on average 50 days of school, 50 to 60 days of school every year. As he's getting older and his body is getting a little stronger, he's that's decreasing. But his whole life, like his mom would have to take days off of work to be with her son. Visits to the emergency room. And this is I'm talking about my nephew Rocco right now, who I love, my little baby. But it's not just Rocco. It's also, it's just like a lot of families talk about like how they're being impacted. I think figuring out like what I want to talk to Bill about is like what is the economic impacts if we don't do, something now. Like I think that is going to be a big motivator, right? Like the loss of work, the loss of wages, how does that impact companies in the region? How does that impact? We have a lot of service workers who work all over the city, cleaning our hotel rooms, cleaning our offices that live in the Southeast side, a lot of SCIU workers in the Southeast side, a lot of blue collar workers that don't work on salary, so if they take a day off, they sometimes, they just don't get paid for that time. And I also know some other stories of moms who had a desk job, who had a nice 9 to 5, who had to go to waitressing because their child was always going in and out of the hospital and always with like respiratory illnesses. So we have done when I was at the Alliance for the Great Lakes and then with our partners on the Southeast side, we did do the Calumet Connect data book. And this was foundational data that had never been done before. So this is just like the area, we were focused on the area from like where the Calumet River starts at Lake Michigan and goes through the neighborhood where like a lot of the industry is. And we did like a mile out from there and compared the health outcomes of the people who live within that mile with the health outcomes of people who are in other industrial corridors in the city as a whole. And what we found was that the southeast side of Chicago residents were experiencing higher instances of COPD, higher instances of heart disease, and then we are also a community that is medically underserved. So you have a lot of sick people and not a lot of places to get help.
I'm curious, so you mentioned Chocolate Hill,
Mhm.
but how does this next phase that you want to do research on, how does that get funded? Like, where do you go? Where does money come from? Where do the people come from?
Yes, well, think about it too, like, who does it benefit if we don't have this data? You know, like who is like coming in the way of like actually figuring out those health outcomes and those impacts.
Yeah.
The fact that there hadn't been like that this data book was foundational and it had never been done before, and like steel mills have been in my neighborhood for over 100 freaking years should be an alarm. Like, okay, we need to double down. So we go to different foundations. We're just getting set up to be able to apply for some of this EPA money that's coming down the pike, and there are a lot more opportunities. And, we have been getting a lot of attention in the media because we had these 2 historic wins when it's not just about like the natural or even not natural, but like these man-made, situations that we're experiencing. And then, we like people in the community, no fault of their own, are now sick. We should have like services, like wraparound services. We should have like that would actually put people to work. There's so many things. I mean, there's so many levels of like different ways that we can get that work funded. It is tricky, and like our little organization is competing with very big environmental organizations and institutions. A lot of universities are going after the same funding. So we do have our work cut out for us.
Yeah, that makes sense. And we're going to dig more into sort of the community piece and the engagement piece in a bit. I did want to touch on one thing before we dig into that a little bit more, which is around heat. So not so much a fun fact, but rising temperatures have been top of mind as we see our climate evolve. So on August 23rd, so after the June events that we experienced, August 23rd, 2023, the heat index in Chicago was up at 116 degrees Fahrenheit. This was tying for the second highest heat index on record in the city since they started recording it. So I'd like to quickly touch on the relationship between air quality and heat, because the intersection there is huge. And Kyra, specifically, I want to start with you because I know that you've done some work in the heat area specifically for the city.
Sure. Deviating slightly, so I am going to come to
wherever
that.
you want.
I was struck by something that you said, Olga, that I think is really important based on the question about funding and where you lightheartedly started in terms of like who can sometimes get in the way. Industry and thinking about the space of corporate social responsibility, I think, is very important. I think it's the role of not just industry and corporations themselves. I think it's a place where government can also stand in to apply pressure. But to your point about some factories being a part of our legacy and a part of what has made Chicago and so many other industrial cities who they are, right? The giants that they are at the global scale have a part to play in not only the monitoring, but also the payment for the healing, restoration, and remediation Thinking about the fact that there are systems that allow people to like pack up and go and simply tell their story of success and victory while other people have to continue to bear that burden is not what I think anybody here would call fair or just. So I don't know if you meant to gloss over it lightheartedly, but I would love to pick it up to say, I think
Thank
that is
you.
the place for
Absolutely.
additional funding and policy to have a stronger arm.
So
To your question about heat, I thought what was very interesting about the lineup of dates is because we had the plumes in June. In late July, the city, in partnership with DOE, the Department of Environment, and the Public Health Department. Fun fact, we actually weren't the Department of Environment yet. So we were the Office of Climate and Environmental Equity. We had lots of acronyms over like the last 2 years. But in partnership with CDPH, we worked with NOAA and a national consultant, Kappa Strategies, to lead a community-led heat monitoring program. And we were one of about 16 cities, I want to say last year, that did this particular activity. And in late July, we activated and mobilized rather about 100 volunteers. More than 550 people actually expressed interest in participating. But when it came down to the day where we needed to actually drive around and measure heat, we had 5 hubs, including the SETF office on the far southeast side. My church in Bronzeville was also a hub, and we mobilized more than 100 volunteers to drive 3 different shifts in the day to measure humidity and temperature. That was in late July, and then the heat index hit its peak in August. The July activation date was actually the hottest day of the summer to date, and we were critically concerned we were going to miss the moment. In Chicago, you kind of never know. And there was this like last moment where we're like, we think this is it. We were constantly calling the National Weather Service, like, what are your forecasts saying? And they're like, it possibly, maybe, high likelihood of, and we're like, we need answers. Weather speak, yeah, which is sometimes really confusing. But we were really grateful that people were motivated, were willing. We had great intergenerational turnout. And then the next month happened where we were like, dang, it got even hotter. And what's really important, I think, about that timeline, or even in that summer, seeing the wildfires and the extreme heat, we also had nationally declared emergencies based on flooding. So last year was a really big year in terms of the category of natural disasters, right? And I think it's a really big year if you are a household or a company where you perhaps employ people whose houses may be impacted on any number of those fronts, whether it was the actual infrastructure of their home, whether or not somebody kid could work their shift or not, or mom had to stay home. Like there were lots of different things happening throughout the summer. And the flood work and the damage that some families had to endure, that's not something that like gets fixed in a day or even a weekend, right? Like you wait for the declaration, then you wait for the potential funding, and then you actually still have to do the work on your house and pray that it doesn't rain that hard again. So last year, I think as we think about it was one of our MCs who said, things are getting weird. Things are getting weird. And the conversations, I think, within the city space are evolving, not just between departments, like with the public health team, but also with the departments like our emergency management team, to say like climate change is not just a factor to consider or just lighthearted about increasing global temperatures, but the impacts and the ramifications are cascading, and we really have to get serious about how we're addressing them. So that connection between air quality and heat is really important. Again, where we tell people to move to, how early do we say, hey, we need you all to be paying attention, or go ahead and open your app. There's a very real thing about alert fatigue and thinking about the fact that, you know, not everybody wants another set of emails coming that say, oh my gosh, beware, you know? So how can we work with community? And this is one of the effects of our work last year. How can we work with community partners to figure out a strategy to really consider that mix of emergency management and what can sometimes traditionally be a very militaristic, like the sky is falling procedure, to the very real day-to-day decisions that we have to make? How can we equip people with the resources and tools to move into action when they need it most? And then how can we continue to be monitoring and analyzing data as it comes? So one way that the city is doing that, again, in partnership with community and other intergovernment agencies, is actually expanding our network of air monitors. In addition to the reference monitors that the EPA has across the city, we know that our community partners want to see more granular data, and how can we be a part of actually making that happen? And how can that information inform some of our public health strategies, some of our strategies as the new Department of Environment, and how we're coordinating other resources, whether it's financing, whether it's health services, or some of those other wraparound policies that may even need to show up in the employee and labor space as well, for those that may be more impacted. Again, taking that service worker or the person who works outside, maybe a lineman, right, for a utility company, or somebody who works for our streets and sand department that has to collect material or waste, right? That person that's outside and exposed to poor air quality may also the same day or the same week be experiencing extreme heat. And what are we doing to ensure that they have the respite that they need and the time that they also need to physically and mentally recuperate so that they can remain safe?
Yeah, so I mean, you touched on so much there, right? And then couple that with the conversation around long-term health impacts and even short-term health impacts. And so I think, like, Olga, I'll probably start with you on this question, which is, I think I know the answer to this question, but let's dig into it a little bit more, which is, do communities in Chicago, in the Midwest, in the Calumet region, do they experience these impacts equally, right? And if not, because I'm pretty sure the answer is no, spoiler, where did the disparities exist? Across what lines are we actually looking at here?
Yeah, it's actually really interesting because you know, we've been working with the city of Chicago on doing a cumulative impact. We did a cumulative impact assessment that is like the precursor and like the meat of actually creating a policy for the city of Chicago, where the permits would have to go through a more stringent process that really would take into account things that you wouldn't think about, like naturally, the demographics of the people who live in the community. Like we would think about those things. So like, how is it going to impact? Because if you have one polluting company in the southeast side, and then that same one you just magically like dropped it in Streeterville, you know, the impacts are going to be different, right? If you have blue collar workers, you know, laborers, who like, you know, might not have those those privileges like time off and like to be able to take care of themselves, or HVAC systems that are actually, you know, cleaning the air in the indoors. So I think the disparities really depend on like your zip code, like where you're living, your income bracket, you know, your education attainment, like those things determine like how much exposure and how you're going to be affected by this, you know, heat or these other events that we're seeing, this bad air quality.
Yeah. So I'm curious too. So Krista, from your perspective, so the fact that there are precautions maybe put in place, they're not necessarily, impacting communities in the same way. I'm curious from your perspective, like what precautions are in place right now to help communities with air quality issues specifically?
Yeah, so we can take this several ways. We can take it the policy route. We can also talk about some of our community work as well. Regarding the policy work, you know, we have our national ambient air quality standards for multiple air pollutants, and we have all these air monitors that are required to be monitored by our air quality agencies, state, local, tribal, to basically assess the air quality and see, you know, if an area is above the health standard or below the health standard. So that's one way that we are, you know, if an area is reading, you know, values that's above the standard and thus violating what we call the NACS, the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, then we know, you know, there's a problem. We need to reduce emissions, and each pollutant has its certain different pathway for this. So it's really important. It depends on the area, the pollutant. Some pollutants are more regional, some are more local. But then we also have the more recent money that came in, the American Rescue Plan funding, ARP. So $100 million was appropriated to US EPA 50 million of that is for environmental justice projects. Then the other 50 million is for community scale air monitoring projects. So that's a national amount, not just Region 5. But we did actually have 12 grants go out to local organizations, nonprofits, just in Region 5 alone. So I think that's really impactful. So essentially what these organizations are hoping to do is in underserved EJ communities is start their own sensor networks, like you were mentioning too, as well. Get the community involved. So there's many different projects to really get more of that local scale, more of the micro scale, air quality readings. So we have our regulatory monitors, but of course there's gaps in between those, unfortunately. So those sensors really help fill in the map in between. You could see on the air now, fire and smoke map, there were a lot more points because there were purple air sensors. It's not a regulatory monitor operated by the state, local, or tribal, but there are sensors that are useful and can give us really impactful data on our current air quality. And I will say that, they are collecting this data and ultimately it will be sent to US EPA for us to look at. So we are working really closely with these local organizations on their air quality and we're staying up to date. We know if they have concerns, we're listening, we're trying to be proactive.
Yeah, I'm just gonna
Do
piggyback
it.
real
Go.
quick because we actually received a little grant and we're partnering with the University of Chicago to do a mid size scale of purple air monitors.
Yeah.
And we have like the SD card, so we could take it out and actually evaluate to see like what kind of VOCs, or like and what we have that will be captured in those. So like there's a lot of air monitors, but there's only a few that people are actually analyzing the data.
Yeah.
So we're going to be able to do that in the southeast side this summer.
That's awesome. Perfect example.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, so you brought up policy, right? And we're talking about some of the funding opportunities and some of the distributions that have been made. I'm curious, just at a high level, what policies, and we can probably go through all of you quickly, what policies exist that are actually working right now and or what needs to exist in order to make something work? I'll start with you, Kyra.
Okay, sorry. Like, very good question. Okay, so I was listening to this webinar yesterday, and it's like really still on my mind. So the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, I think, are really helpful. And what was actually striking about that conversation, and to your point, right, understanding the federal, state, and local government needs, is that those standards are iterative, right? So I think it is to what needs to happen, right? That part of the question. I do think that we are in a place, particularly as the city, where we're doing that, right? The cumulative impact assessment work is foundational to that point of saying, not rather than only having thresholds for certain types of pollutants, can we actually take a holistic picture to understand how compounding pollutants or compounding burdens impact population, right? As well as the environment, right? So thinking about both people and our natural spaces. And so that I think is an example of not just a project for the sake of data collection, but truly the cornerstone for policy development that is not just informed by community voices, but is co-developed with communities to ensure that we are tailoring existing policies and creating new standards as needed. I would also say that Chicago is really excited to be on the journey to develop a heat vulnerability index. Again, a tool that will then inspire other policy. There are a number of cities that actually don't have an HVI, but after last year's work to monitor heat and extreme heat in the city, we knew that that was actually just a precursor to this index. And so we are working with Northwestern University and a number of other partners, including some of those same organizations that helped us with last year's monitoring, to develop actually the community engagement process that will help us develop the index. And why do we need a process to develop another process? It's because there are lots of decisions in there, right? And data in and data out, right? Garbage in, garbage out. One of the things that we have been taken to task with by community partners is they want to be there. And I say we because we're Chicagoans, right?
Yeah.
As neighbors, we, and particularly those who are in communities that are most impacted or
highly sensitive should be at the table to say, hey, actually, I think it's this data set, or we read this data in a different way. And so we're really excited to have a table of technical experts as well as policymakers and community partners to pull together that Rubik's Cube to develop the actual index. And then a number of departments have committed to using the results of that and its future iterations to develop more meaningful policy around emergency management and public health strategies.
So I want to dig into the community engagement piece in a second, but I do want to cover the policy piece with both Krista and Olga first.
No,
So-
we took a different route. We took a completely different route. We were like, the city, now there was a pattern of the city behaving, and especially with the General Iron case, there was like 3 different entities that were moved from the north branch of the Chicago River
Mhm.
to the Calumet River, where in my neighborhood. So because there was a pattern, we filed a civil rights complaint to HUD because the city of Chicago receives funding and that's supposed to be spent in ways that are equitable. And in this case, concentrating polluters or companies that have like a lot of violations, like all in one community, is create a sacrifice zone. And that's why we filed a civil rights complaint to HUD that was settled last year. And in that complaint, in the settlement agreement, the city now has to do a bunch of things.
Okay. Yep.
And then also, we took that almost the same civil rights complaint and filed against IEPA to the US EPA and said the same thing, because at the state level in Illinois, there is no third party right of appeal. So what does that mean? That like if a company wants to move, in the city of Chicago needs a permit, they got to get a permit from the state of Illinois first. And then if they issue the permit, we cannot appeal.
Oh.
But the company can appeal if they don't get it. So that has to change too. So there's like a lot of, so with our civil rights complaint to US EPA, they're gonna have to make a lot of change. That settlement, the state of Illinois is gonna have to make a lot of changes in the way that they do permitting as well. Because they give the first permit that then puts in motion like the permits and all the things that they have to get on the municipal level. So we had to take those interventions because we have shown up to like the comment periods. We do letters, we, do all the things, but the deck is very much stacked against us. So like we have to prove that what they're doing is going to harm us, and it doesn't start with the company having to prove that they're not going to harm us.
Yeah. Yeah. When you and I were talking one-on-one, you referred to this as like a Hail Mary.
Oh, yeah, we
and-
never thought, because we had done all the things. We didn't think we were gonna win these civil rights complaints. We were like, well, we tried everything else. Like, it was kind of one of those conversations.
Well, I think it's telling too that like the Hail Mary is the thing that had to work, right? Because to your point, you're
Yes.
showing up to comment periods, you're doing everything right, you're working within the system. And so you have to take those extreme measures in order to affect the change you actually want to see.
We had to take those risks,
Yeah.
and that's also when we talk about funding, like it's so hard to fund. Like funders want to fund something that's going to be done in 1 year, 2 or 3 years. A lawsuit can last a very long time.
Yeah, I mean, I see that just in the climate space. I work in tech in the climate space, and talking with some funders and VC folks, a lot of the companies and the solutions we're talking about break their models. So they're
Yeah.
just like, well, we're not going to see the growth we want in this amount of time, which someone with an app can do that's doing something in fintech potentially, right? And it's just like, it's a different system entirely. So very different from yours, but just like the model doesn't
Right.
fit. Yeah. So I'm interested. So let's take a little bit more. I got a time check from you, and I got a hand wave from Patrick. Where are we at time wise?
You're at 6:34. We can switch to Q&A if you want. We have one in Zoom unless anybody else wants to jump in with.
I want to do one more question for the panel, and then we can
Absolutely.
dive in. Is that cool with everyone? Okay, sweet. Okay. So I do want to just do a little bit more of a deep dive into community and into community engagement. So just generally, we can go down the line of, so much of what we've talked about tonight is getting community involved with either showing up and taking air quality measurements or downloading apps or showing up for protests. And I think we talked about hunger strikes at one point, Olga, right? So I
We
guess,
actually have one of those hunger strikers in the audience today, actually, Oscar Sanchez, who was on a hunger strike for 30 days to
30
bring
days.
attention to this issue, to the issue of the relocation of General Iron.
okay, so I mean, let's start. Just what works? How can we get communities activated and engaged in these discussions?
I mean, the thing is, everything that we learned before COVID is like really out the window. So like we had to learn new ways of interacting with communities during a global pandemic when we weren't able to do it. So most of these campaigns that I'm talking about right now in the last 4 or 5 years, they were happening during a global pandemic, during like racial uprisings. And then, to some extent, some of that has subsided. Obviously, we're all here in person, but getting people out to community events after the pandemic has been really strange for us. Like it hasn't, it's not as easy. It's almost like starting from scratch. A lot of families have moved, so we have to like meet community again, and then getting people to come out to stuff because they hadn't been engaged in real life, like in person. So there's like a lot of things that we're trying, right? Like we're experimenting. We're doing a lot of door knocking right now. We're like, inviting people and to meetings and following up in that way. And then creating opportunities online for people to engage. And then right now we have, actually Oscar doesn't even know this, we have some students from George Washington High School who are going to be creating TikToks about environmental justice. Like, yeah, I live in the southeast side of Chicago. Of course, I have lots of friends who have asthma, one of those like TikTok videos. So they're like working on a script right now. It's the most adorable thing. They're like,
Yeah, you gotta activate
12-year-olds.
those Gen Z and Gen Alphas.
Gen
Yeah.
Alphas. Yes, I'll pass.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So we have several programs, like I mentioned, the community sensors, which are really great to bring awareness to these communities and really get them involved in air quality. But we also have a sensor loan program in Region 5 where you can actually fill out a request to get your own sensor. We have Purple Airs as well as some others. I'm not the lead on that, so I'm not sure all the sensor types. I think they're mostly particulate matter focus, which are little dust particles. So that's something really cool. I know we've loaned to libraries, to schools, and it's a great way to get students and younger community members involved too, which is really important because awareness is knowledge, and being aware is really, really important for your air quality. And then we also have something else that's fun that's kind of tailored towards libraries and schools, but I think businesses also get these too. It's the AQI flag program. So it's actually, you request it from EPA, you get a set of flags with like each color of the AQI that you were seeing during the presentation. And whatever the AQI is for that day, that's the color flag that they fly. So during the smoke plumes, they might have had the red or maroon flag out during the really unhealthy days. So it's a great way, again, to get students and the community involved and really bring awareness to air quality. So.
Yeah, visibility, right?
Yeah.
If I were to get one of those sensors, would I pop up on your map that you showed at the beginning?
If you want to, I believe you could turn off that function, like if you want to be on the map or not, but yeah.
I mean, I'd want to be on the map.
Yeah.
I think that's
Yeah. Yes.
Very cool. Very cool. All right, Tara.
I would say, I feel like the Debbie Downer a little bit, but we're rounding out the types of engagement, right? So with government, there are some very traditional ways to get involved in terms of calling your alderman, showing up to public meetings, that whole piece. But I would really like to commend the modernization of some of our processes in terms of city council meetings being online. Definitely during the pandemic, the ability to actually write in your comments is now available. And I think that has, that was not just because of COVID, but also that's really helpful for people who cannot attend a meeting that starts at 10 o'clock on a Wednesday. So using those types of channels when available, I think is fantastic. I particularly like to remind people to get involved with a local organization and like a hyper local organization that may be doing the difficult fight, right? You may have agency and access to spaces and people and decision makers who may listen to your call in a different way than somebody else's. And solidarity looks like being able to share those resources. And so kind of sometimes doing that quick analysis of like, what's my personal privilege is also really great. It's something that has been really hard, I think, for me personally as a young Black girl from the South Side, but who now works in government to like check that and acknowledge that there are there are privileges that I have and that I should also be bringing to the table and bearing forward. So whatever that sounds like to you in your head as you do that personal check, consider a way to lend that to those who maybe have tried it all and who could really use a little energy. The caveat I always offer with that, however, is that it is important to take the lead of those who have been leading the fight for a very long time as well. New energy is always fantastic, but again, that piece about solidarity is really important. So leading and really joining arms in respect, mutual solidarity is really, really important as well. So
Amazing. I think that's a really good note to end on,
Yes.
solidarity.
Mhm.
Sweet. Okay, let's turn it over to Patrick. I knew it was going to happen. Do you have the portable microphone?
Absolutely, yes.
Wonderful.
So if anybody has any questions, go ahead and raise your hand. I have one to kick us off, and I'll jump to you right afterwards. But go ahead and raise your hands as we continue along. Along this lines, in a similar way, I know we talked about things that we can do in the context of organizations or politically or whatnot, but as we look at the magnitude of scale, the maps we saw in North America and all the severity that we're addressing, is there any other actions that you recommend for us here right now, us individuals, when we go home, that we can take action? So that way it wasn't just a fun evening of food and drinks and panel discussion, but actual action. Is there anything that we missed in that?
I don't know. I would just say, like, the neighborhoods like mine and organizations like mine, and I mean, so much work happened before I got involved. You know, there was Hazel Johnson, Peggy Salazar, Marianne Burns, all these the OGs from like environmental justice that have been fighting for years. I think one thing would be like just you feel that rage, like be enraged. Like this is not something that like for us, like we have to deal with this every day, like being in these situations like Little Rocco, and I think showing like not letting just like folks who are experiencing this take those big risks, but like yeah, getting out of those comfort zones, because we have to live in our discomfort all the time. So letting yourselves like be like in that discomfort and having those hard conversations, and when you get a crappy answer from like an elected official or somebody who is in a position of power, like just rebuttal, be ready, like don't move out the way, have a follow-up question, and then ask them to show you where it says that it can't happen, because that's always my favorite. Show me where it says you can't do this right now.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm going to follow up a little bit on where you were going there. So first of all, I think you are living in the future, and it's a little terrifying, and you are incredibly brave and bold, and thank you. But in listening to so many things about all the monitors, all the everything, this is all reactive. And when you're talking about plumes, which was the first one, it made General Irons seem like, oh, you can do something about that. That's, you got that. But when you have a forest fire like this, what it reminds me of, and it has happened before, was the Dust Bowl in the Great Depression. In 1935, there was a dust storm that dropped, I don't know whether it was 12 million or 12 billion or what it was, but pounds and pounds of just dust all over Chicago. You couldn't see anywhere. It was terrible. It then went on and did the same thing all the way to New York. So as we're going forward here and it's getting warmer and hotter, is our best answer to just, do I need a monitor to know that the air is crappy? What do we do here?
I have a response to that. So we do realize, this is a hopefully not continual problem, but could be with the effects of climate change. So just recently, back in November of 2023, there was a memorandum of understanding, an MOU, between 4 federal agencies. So this is between US EPA, US CDC, US Department of Interior, as well as the US Forest Service, because basically this MOU talks about how with climate change, all these federal agencies, we need to collaborate and work together and really focus on land management that includes prescribed burning. To really manage the forests and prevent these large scale fires, because if you manage the forest, you're less likely to have a devastating large wildfire that puts these large plumes into the atmosphere that can travel really far. Prescribed burning, of course, you still do have smoke, but it's not nearly on the same scale as it could be if the entire forest was burning. So really, we want to work together with these federal agencies to have prescribed burning, better land management practices to prevent these forest fires, because we do realize this is a big problem, especially, you know, in the West, but now in eastern portions of the country where we haven't seen this before. So definitely something we are talking about at the federal level. Yeah.
And I'm sorry, could you finish that piece? You're thinking about the 95% and what?
Was that those horrible fires last year? That was 5% of the Canadian forest. There's 95% less.
Yes.
And it's still hot. And I read recently that there were 100 fires currently burning, that they had gone into sort of an underground smoldering phase, but hadn't been put out. So this could easily happen again. And that's, you know, it really is a little overwhelming.
Okay.
Yeah.
I maybe offer a piece. I was trying to get it. I did follow the math as well, but I was trying to understand that secondary piece about proactive either surveillance or action, and I wasn't sure exactly what piece. However, I do think that the MOU that you're describing between the federal agencies is critically important. The transboundary movement of pollution is critical and is also prompting lots of discussion internationally as well. So I was recently at a convening where this piece came up and we said, well, who's actually to blame, right? Like, or how do we hold other countries accountable for funding of programs, whether it's prevention or surveillance or actual response strategies, particularly at the public health level, or is it just at the land management level? And that was not resolved at that convening, but those types of conversations are also happening. So interagency development, but also that international government to government element. I would suggest that tapping into some of these national systems is a major privilege that we have here, right? These national networks that have an app and a website those are not available to everybody. And so last year when we were watching the plumes move across the US, everybody all of a sudden had downloaded this app and everybody was chiming in to say, dear city, why aren't you doing something? It's now red, it's now purple. We're like, we're watching the same website you are. And it was a really great way to see community activation in a particular way. But there was some encouragement that I was like, okay, well now people have the information they need to take action for their household. It doesn't absolve other systems of taking action, but I would say that it is a privilege and a benefit not to overlook so that you can move at the pace that you need to for your family.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest consumer of petrol is the US military. You know, so like what are we gonna do? I mean, it's huge. This is huge. Like, we're talking about the people who know that this is happening, that the planet is going to hell in a handbasket, are gonna make as much freaking money as they can on the way there. Like, that's what they have shown us. Like, we just have to see, like, they're not hiding it, you know, like they're buying properties in like New Zealand and things so they could go save themselves when that time comes and like figuring out how to live in space. So like, this is real. Like, we're in it. And like, we have to figure out like how to build that power, you know, to change. It's gonna take a lot. I mean, that's why I'm involved, you know, because I could use my example of my little nook, but it's a international problem. My neighborhood is an international port. Like, the billions of dollars of raw commodities that are coming through this international port, like, for who, for what? I'm not getting anything out of this, you know, I'm getting polluted on. So there's this idea that this is just the way, and people are we have sacrifice zones where people are gonna be suffering during, in these situations. So whatever it is we do, like I go speak to schools all the time, and kids wanna know, like, what we do. We were talking about this in the green room a while ago. We need everybody. We need lawyers, we need engineers, teachers, nurses, like we all have a role. But what we have to get clear on are who are those targets. Once that happens, forget about it. But as long as we're still fighting each other and like being divided the way that we have been, you know, like there's a crazy article that I just read a couple months ago, actually. Our sister Sheila Garland sent it to Oscar and I, talking about Chicago and the way that the population is shifting, like people who are moving into Chicago are like higher income brackets. And we know because yesterday, you know, this measure, to the Bring Chicago Home measure lost, right? This is support for homelessness, you know, for like people so like we have to take care of people's bare like necessities, you know, housing, a job, income, you know, and clean air, clean water. Like those should be like non-negotiables for all of us. And when we see people not having all those things, then we should be enraged. Someone should get in trouble for that, lose their job, you know, like that. And then we should just run for office and we should do all the things. Like we should just put ourselves in those situations, you know, so we could be decision makers, because we can't do any worse than these fuckers.
Amen. Janet, you gonna run for office?
So your response to this last question touched on a lot of these points already, but I know that about a month ago, the city announced a lawsuit against 6 of the biggest oil companies and lobbies. But I know wildfires are different in that whatever happens there, there's no tap to turn off right away, and Canada is still smoldering. So the memorandum you mentioned touches on this, but how in your different areas has a problem like this with a much longer timeline? And we saw the plumes over state, city, tribal, national borders change the way that resolving and predicting natural disasters works for each of you.
Yeah. I'm happy to kick us off. I'll try to be brief because I imagine there may be some more questions too in the room. One of the spaces that I'm actually really excited to see this shift happen is the space of emergency management. FEMA, right? We're familiar with that agency as well. Requires states to ultimately have a host of plans, right? And mitigation planning particularly. Entities have to identify hazards and threats. Those threats are wide-ranging, everything from cyber attacks to active shooter events to a whole host of natural disaster issues, and wildfires falls under that category. Each state's plan does not look the same, and there are multiple types of plans that even address these hazards and threats. But this is like one of those things that I've been like slowly being like, I really need to talk about this thing, and they have been very generous. And I'm grateful that we are in a place actually in the cycle of the renewal of one of our plans where this is coming up. And it's slowly come up in a few different places wherever I have been permitted to like just be in the space, right? And pull in my own chair. Like, my team has something to say. And I'm excited that the emergency management landscape is seeing climate change in a different way. And this is not new to this year, but I am acknowledging this upcoming cycle where we get to actually address how we are, what we call certain hazards, what hazards are even in the plan, and then what types of things we would like to fund or in the future. These planning processes are important because they allow us to then say to the federal agency, we need money to do this thing because we identified this hazard. It's even more important if we can say we actually understand that this has a tailored impact on or a heightened impact on certain communities. So that's like one example of where the climate change conversation is growing beyond more traditional concepts of greening or sustainability and really getting this attention that it deserves. in terms of an emergency strategy. And not simply as the threat being climate change, but actually that it threatens all the other hazards, right? And you even mentioned the positive feedback loop that happens within the natural disaster space or within the natural hazard space. And so it's important, I think, to talk about the way that climate can debase and amplify some of those other risks. And that's one area where I'm kind of enthusiastic about the opportunity to find alternate revenue streams to come up with better surveillance programs, like monitoring programs for like pollutants, as well as the funding for hyperlocal mitigation or educational strategies as well. It's a place where we can also move the needle in terms of how we build things or what types of emergency strategies should be developed in what parts of the city or what part of the county. And so that's one space where I do think that the dialogue is changing and we're pushing the boundary of like response.
We have time for maybe one more question and then closing thoughts from everybody. Is that okay?
Hello. First, thank you so much for coming. I found this very knowledgeable, gained a lot of knowledge from it. I do have a question. I am more on the novice side of this, but the good neighbor rule of the EPA that could be going to the Supreme Court that coordinates pollution across state lines. If any insights about that. Also, then on a different thing is just how the city of Chicago possibly works with our neighboring cities and counties or even across state lines, just some sort of how that is actually done in today's world.
So I actually don't work with the Good Neighbor Plan, so I just very surface level know about it. But I can get back with you with more info if you have specifics about the Good Neighbor Plan, so I apologize.
It's also not the bread and butter of my work, particularly. However, that the cross-city conversations are plentiful. I do think that we're constantly in communication or in certain networks where it's like, how are you guys addressing that thing? And particularly wildfires, right? I think that was an example where many of us were looking west to say, okay, what did you do, or in what sequence, or over the last 10 years, what has shown to work best? So I will say that yes, sounds very responsive, but even proactively, those networks exist. One that particularly comes to mind is the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, or USDN. Some of you actually may be involved in this space or previously, and that has been and continues to be a great space for practitioners to really be able to share resources and lean on one another. And so that's one that I would offer that has been really helpful. And then, that sometimes is the exact direct person you need to talk to say, as a fellow policymaker, this is how we discussed that. And then, of course, I know that the environmental justice space nationally is robust and decades in the making. So that is also a space where those types of community to community, if not city to city as municipalities, where those discussions happen as well.
Nothing to add.
Yeah, I do think it's really interesting in the work I've done through Chicago Climate Connect and working in climate, how looking at climate changes what local means a little bit. We have an event coming up in September that the Canadian Consulate's going to host because we share a basin, right? And I think also projects that aren't in air quality but are in sort of adjacent areas, like the Renew Great Lakes project, that Current Water Hub, and Elena, who's a total badass. If you don't know who she is, look her up. Put together, they are bringing together 50 different partners in 6 different states to work on wastewater reclamation projects. So I think the biggest takeaway for me from this panel and from the questions that have been asked is really when it comes to wildfires, air quality, or even, our water spaces or other spaces, it's really the collaboration and the community engagement piece, and not only, collaboration between government and, nonprofit community-based organizations, but between cities, between states, between countries. So just thank you to all of you for being here tonight. It's super scary and inspiring. Your dedication is kick-ass and inspiring. So thanks so much for joining us. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
I just want to give a big thank you to our wonderful panelists and moderator, Olga Bautista, Krista Thomason, Kyra D. Woods, and our moderator, Mackenzie Siren. Thank them again. Just want to thank you. Yeah.
And an all-women panel during International Women's Day month, you know, snaps for us.
We also, of course, want to thank our wonderful sponsor and host, William Blair. Thank you so much for having us, for staying late, for being here, for representing. To our sponsors, those of you who donated time, money, or items, thank you so much. We really appreciate you. I'm going to hand it off to Harula.
Couple more thank yous to the Delta Institute, our parent organization, and to all of my fellow Dells. Thank you for helping us host another great event. And for those of you interested, as we said earlier, the application for our 24 to 25 Dells Associate Board opens tonight. Please join us for our first virtual info session next Tuesday, March 26th. We hope to see you guys there. If you had fun tonight, and like Bill mentioned, if you want to keep celebrating with Delta and party hard, please join us on May 21st at the Chicago History Museum. That's where we will celebrate Delta's 25th anniversary. And last but not least, our silent auction and our QR codes will stay open until 5 p.m. CST Friday, March 22nd, excuse me. All proceeds will help offset costs for Dell events and help support Delta's efforts in our community. With that, thank you and good night. And we appreciate all of you for coming tonight.